assisting you for today's session. I'd like to welcome everybody to this 1 hour webinar. It's called Revamp Your Total Reward Strategy for 2023, capitalizing on the latest trends. So, this session, as I mentioned, will be 1 hour. We have an additional maybe 15 minutes for question and answer at the end. For some house rules, please make sure that you are muted during the duration of our course or webinar in this case to avoid any disruptions. Please feel free to unmute yourselves for any urgent questions, like if you misheard a certain word or don't understand a certain word, you can make use of the chat. If you have more questions, please put them in the chat. My colleagues and I will be collecting them, and when we very clear about this, we will post the questions for Sandrine at the end, just so we don't spend 10 minutes answering one question that's pretty famous or popular. So yeah, this session is recorded. You can feel free to email us at operation@hrd-future.com so that you can get a link to that recording. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our multiple award-winning compensation benefits expert. Let me give you a bit of background. So she has 30 years of experience in total rewards, 20 of which was spent or specialized in international compensation and benefits for the likes of, Apple, Microsoft, Philips, and the Fiat Group. When I say multiple award winning, I do mean it. She is one of the top 150 most inclusive HR influencer list for 2 years. She's a recipient of the Global Compensation and Benefits Leadership Award, Top 100 Women Achievers, and she's been nominated for Reward 300 and Hall of Fame. She loves to share, she loves to educate, she designs and delivers her own course, and is also a faculty of World at Work, you might be familiar, and AIHR and CIPD Middle East. She provides internal coaching for career-oriented HR professionals, as everybody in here. And as part of her outreach to educate the HR community, she authors a blog called The Compensation Insider. Over 320 plus blog posts, all published in magazines, topics related to employee value proposition. She's a speaker of over 180 events now. And so believe me when I say you are in perfectly, perfectly amazing hands. Everybody, please welcome Sandrine Bardot. Let me turn over the floor to you, and I'll be in the background for technical support.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. First of all, I have to say, I'm very, very grateful for HRD Future for organizing this webinar and inviting me to speak. This is one of my first webinars that is targeting really the future of total rewards and talking about how to think about it to update your thinking on your strategy. We have a world which is changing. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation. So just to make sure, I'll go through the presentation. I'll take questions and answers at the end. And please don't hesitate to use the chat. The team at HRD Future will be monitoring it. So, and now I will share my screen with you. Can somebody please confirm to me? All right, super. Thank you so much. Let's get started. If I manage, yes. So today I'm going to talk about, first of all, the concept of total rewards, and then how do we examine our reward strategy, looking at the external elements, then the internal elements, and also a very important topic nowadays, which is employee preferences, which are getting more and more prevalent into how we need to think about designing a reward strategy. From there, we will dig into, I've just identified 7 business questions that can have an impact in 2023 for total rewards and in the coming years as well. So we'll go through them and see what could be their impact in terms of total rewards. And I will end up with kind of a description of some of my views of what the future of the function is going to be and the future of what we do as reward professionals or HR professionals that are involved in that field. So If we start with the holistic rewards, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the World at Work model. So World at Work is the, let's say, largest compensation and benefits association in the world. It's mostly American. It used to be called the American Compensation Association, but in the past few years has made lots of progress towards being more globally oriented. And they have this model of total reward strategy where basically what we say, what is total rewards? How I like to describe it, for me, when I say I work in compensation and benefits or in total rewards or in performance and reward, the most important thing is that what is total reward? What we give to an employee in exchange for their work. So obviously it goes from the financial elements of what we give to them, their salary, their benefits, but also the things that complement that employee value proposition. So the recognition, the well-being, and also the what World at Work called the development, which is all those growth opportunities that we might give to an employee. Why do we do that? Because we know that when we offer this kind of employee value proposition that is well adapted to the needs of the employees, we have an employee workforce which is more productive, more committed. And what happens when those workforce experiences are positive? There has been lots of studies that have demonstrated that the performance of the company is going to increase. You have happier, longer tenured customers, you have improved productivity, you have improved revenue for the organization. So how do we make sure that this reward strategy is designed properly? If you look on the left part of the slide, you will see that we have to take into account a certain number of external influences. So for example, here at the bottom, the social norms, the law, the labor market, all those evolutions. Also some internal influences which are related to your own organization are going to be much more specific to what you do, your workforce competition, the kind of leadership style that you have, the culture that you have in your organization, the strategy that you have in your organization. All of that shapes the business strategy, which in turn shapes the HR strategy, which in turn shapes the total reward strategy. So it's all kind of connected together. When we look at different models of the framework, basically what we see, this is an old Hay Group framework, where they look at all those elements of the package, and this is how they approach it. They go from the bottom to the top, and they go from the base salary, then all kind of things that are paid within less than a year, so the short-term variable pay. So that could be any kind of annual bonus scheme, that could be a sales commission plan, that could be a spot award, and so on. Then there is the elements of pay, which is a little bit more long-term, so the long-term incentives, LTIs, and which can be typically given in the form of equity, so shares of the company, or sometimes in forms of cash. And all of that is called the direct compensation. Then on top of that, you add the benefits. So that would be anything like the health insurance, retirement, vacation days, what we call income replacement. So in some countries, you have insurance for if in case you lose the job, in case you become disabled, and all this kind of stuff. On top of those benefits, which are typically more on the insurance side, you have the perquisites. The perquisites are more like benefits in kind. So that could be being granted a car for status, like sometimes you might allow a general manager or VP to have a car, maybe to have an annual membership to a club. And what we see as well for senior executives, physical exams, because you want to make sure that those people are in the best possible health, given their impact on the organization. And then there is what Hay calls the intangible rewards, which are the things that are very difficult to put a financial value on, but are also very important to the employees. So that would be things like work-life balance, the values of the organization, the work environment, the future development opportunities, and so on. So as you can see, It's the same elements than World at Work, but presented in a different manner. And to show you that there are 200 ways to skin a cat, here's the Towers-Watson model of how they group the rewards elements. They first have the foundational rewards, and they say this is what is at the basis of everything: your base pay, your benefits, your allowances, your healthcare, and so on. Then you have everything that is related to performance. So that would be your annual incentive plans, your long-term incentive plans, profit sharing plans, how you do your salary increases, the promotions, the recognition, and so on. And then you have the career and environmental rewards, which is all that kind of other environment where you will find all the training and development, the mobility, the work-life balance, and so on, the well-being, and so on. So as you can see, this is just a different way of grouping the different elements. And I've also played with that. For me, that's my model. It's just for fun because I don't really use it. But I said, hey, let's use the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure a lot of you are really familiar with, and see what elements of a full employee value proposition would correspond to which elements of the reward mix. And so as you can see, to support one person's physiological needs, you need to have their salary and their allowances to make sure that they can afford, their shelter, their food, and so on. Their safety needs are covered by all the benefits, the healthcare, the retirement plans, the saving schemes, and so on. And then when it comes to their social needs, we come into the area of CSR, for example, community involvement programs, work-life balance, all the events that the company can organize, like the celebration of the organization, team events, and so on. Then for the ego needs, you have all things that are related to pay for performance, to recognition, to any kind of awards that somebody might receive. And when it comes to self-actualization, which is making oneself better, of course, it's all the stuff which is related to training and development, the career opportunities, and so on. So as you can see, multiple ways to skin a cat. What I'm trying to convey here is that it's really important that when you think of the different elements of a package, you don't just take them one by one. Put them into an entirety and into a holistic approach, because this is how when you move some pieces of the puzzle, it has an impact on the others, and you need to really try to consider all the different moving parts that we have. So all nice and said, but how do we design this reward strategy, and how do we in 2023 make sure that we adapt or that at least we're confident that we shouldn't change anything into our reward strategy? So first of all, what's the reward strategy? So here I have a quote from Michael Armstrong, who's one of the in the UK most famous authors of books for the CIPD on human resources and reward in particular. And in one of his books, he says, reward strategy clarifies what the organization wants to do in the longer term to develop and implement reward policies, practices, and processes that will further the achievement of its business goals. It's a declaration of intent, which establishes priorities for developing and acting on reward plans that can be aligned to business and HR strategies and to the needs of people in the organization. So this definition really covers everything, because it tells you that the reward strategy is kind of your overall framework during which you design your reward policies for the different elements that is aligned to your business needs, to your HR strategy, and to the needs of the people in your company. So looking at how that comes about, the first step, of course, is to make a diagnosis of your current situation. So you're going to look at your external environment, your internal environment, and also let's not forget to look at what we currently offer to make sure that it's fit for purpose. From there, we look at the alignment with the business strategy and the HR strategy, and we can develop our reward strategy, which will give us some goals. And then we can formulate the policies and implement them, which will have a significant communication component. And depending where you are in the world, different layers of how you involve stakeholders. For example, in Europe, you have European Works Council or local Works Council, you have trade unions, and you are legally mandated to do some negotiations with them on certain topics, and you are better off to do some negotiations with them on other topics, or even though that's not legally mandated. In other parts of the world, maybe the law is not requiring that, but your company culture and so on will make you work with the business, with some representatives of the employees and so on. So what are the main questions that we have to answer when we're designing a reward strategy? I have listed 5 here. So the first one is our objective. What are we trying to achieve through the reward programs? Is it to have people, to recruit more people? Is it to retain our existing employees? Is it to make people happier? Is it to be more let's say, focus on the return on investment on our people spend and so on. So we need to be clear about that. The second step is one which most organizations, let me not say forget, but tend to underestimate, is they don't really put in place, before starting the process, somewhere figuring out to know how to evaluate whether the plans that are put in place are reaching those goals or not. And that's a very important point, because if you don't know to prove that whatever plan you're putting in place is working or not, how do you want to have credibility with the business? And how do you know if you need to make some changes or not? So it's very important that you try to think of those things before that happens. The third step is the information, both internal and external, that we need to gather in order to understand where we are today compared to where we want to be. The where we want to be is the answer to question number 1. From there, once we have those gaps, how do we prioritize and address the gaps? And then how do we deploy that change? So how do we ensure flexibility in the future? How do we communicate? Do we run pilots? Do we address certain parts of the population first? Do we prioritize short-term incentive plans over benefits or whatever? We will have to answer all those questions when we are designing our reward strategy. Sorry. So the first thing to do is to look at your external environment. And for that, it's good to look at the...
Hello?
Hello?
Hey.
Yes?
I think maybe that was unmuted by mistake. Yeah.
Okay. So, so basically, we will look at the external environment first. And what I recommend to my clients, or what I do drive for them when they ask me to do that, is to use a classic model, which is called the PESTEL approach, but driven towards human resources and driven towards reward and benefits. So the PESTEL analysis look at 6 different types of factors. The first one is political, that's the P for PESTEL. So you need to figure out how is the political environment in the countries where I'm operating? Is it stable? Is it not stable? Do we have taxes, new taxes that are coming up, and so on? Give you an example I think we can all relate to is a year and a half ago, nobody would have thought that there would be so much tension in Europe due to the Ukraine crisis. So that has created all sorts of different conversations. Or for example, at the moment, I'm French, so I'm going to talk about a French topic. There is a lot of tension in France and huge demonstrations against the government plans to increase the number of years of contributions before being eligible to full retirement, which would mean that retirement age would increase from 65 to 67. I think that's what they're proposing. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff. The second type of external element that you need to think about is the economy. So inflation has been top of mind for a lot of countries in the past 18 months. You also have some countries that face challenges due to the devaluation of their country. You might have a high unemployment rate, which will affect maybe how the salaries are offered to employees and so on. So you need to really look into that. And you really need to look into it country by country, because it's going to be very different from one entity to another. The next set of external analysis is the social. So in the social, you need to look at things like the demographics, the education levels, and so on. Very, very important. You have some countries, like, for example, Japan, that are on a demographic let's say type where they have an older population overall, while you have other countries like, for example, in Africa, where they have a huge amount of young people who are maybe not as much educated. So you need to really take that into account to understand what's going to drive the workforce needs, what's going to drive the candidate pools that you're going to have, and so on. The T of pestle is the technology. So we're looking into things such as digitization, automation, AI. At the moment, I think most of you have heard of this generative AI called ChatGPT, which is kind of, depending who you listen to, fantastic, because it's talking to you like a person, and other people say it's evil because it's like trying to say that it wants to be alive and kill people and destroy marriages and so on. So this will have an impact on work. We're starting to see it already. This ChatGPT, for example, for me, I have a client in Abu Dhabi that I'm helping with their performance management. I've already tested a few scenarios of how we could use ChatGPT in certain circumstances until those tools are incorporated, or similar tools are incorporated into the HRIS solutions that are offered by the big providers. Then the next set of impact that you might have is the environment. And the environment in the sense of the nature around us, and things like climate change and the corporate social responsibility. You might think, what does that have to do with HR? What does that have to do with reward? But actually, more and more what we're seeing is that companies are being held accountable, especially the ones that are listed, are being held accountable on their green policies and so on, and in trying to incorporate ESG criteria, so economic, social, and I can't remember what the G stand for. Okay, sorry for that. But criteria into their long-term incentive plan for their executives, for example. The final thing that you need to look at is the legal environment. So what's going to change in the law? What has changed in terms of health and safety, antitrust, intellectual property, consumer protection, and so on. Again, you might think, what consumer protection, what does that have to do with HR? Well, in Europe, things like the GDPR, which is how companies can have access to people information, and it has an impact even on what you can do in terms of your HRIS and how you collect the information, how you store it, and so on. So you really have to think of all those elements. So really just take the pestle that you have here and really brainstorm with your team to try and identify all of those. And if you have, again, operations in multiple countries, you need to do that across your different entities, because it's going to be different from one country to another. Then there are other things that have been changes in the last few years that are affecting the reward strategy. So Great Resignation, the orange one here is a more recent one, which is coming from COVID, and the fact that after COVID, a lot of people started to maybe reassess some of their priorities and then started to resign, find better job opportunities. And we have entire industries that are struggling to attract candidates. I'm thinking especially industries like food and beverage, hospitality, and so on. But even recently, I was reading, like maybe 10 days ago, there's a company in the UK. There is a well-paid job on an oil rig in somewhere across Aberdeen or something like that in the north of in the north of UK or in Scotland, I don't remember. They've been posting that job. It pays very well, but nobody is applying. So, you can really see that there's that which is taking place. You will have seen also maybe that companies are starting to redefine who they want to keep as their core employees and who they can work with on a more temporary basis. So you would have contract workers, contingent workers, people like me who are consultants and so on, who come and go, and who might be coming and going on a regular basis. But how do you handle those people? How do you think about evaluating their performance? If you're like Amazon, for example, and Amazon in the US every year recruits, I think I read somewhere 100,000 people for the final end of the year, where they have, the return to school in September, then they start to have all the Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas and Black Friday and all this kind of stuff. So they hire a lot of people to work temporarily in their warehouses. And what they have had to put in place, even though those are not like permanent employees, is ways to identify those people that they felt were doing a good job, so that they would offer them to come back as a priority, because they know that they already know the job and they do a good job. So how do you handle all of that? You have more and more things about equity and transparency, and especially with the younger generations coming into the workplace, so the young millennials and the Gen Zers. And of course, topics around diversity, equality, demographics that are going to impact the organization as well. We see, and recently, International Women's Day, there's more and more discussion about how do we want to make sure that we have equity in the organization. We have also topics that have been even more emphasized since COVID came in. Of course, flexible working, including people who are working fully remote, people who are working in a hybrid way, people who are fully remote, for example. Do you allow them to be fully remote, but in the same country? Do you allow them to work from another country? What would be the tax implications and all this kind of stuff? There's also more and more focus on well-being and listening to the employee voice, and of course, getting more individualized in how you relate to the employees, because we have this huge push towards personalization. Not just in human resources, but in the whole world. Nowadays, you can get a car and get it personalized. You can nice t-shirt.
Nó nói là tại vì hồi bình thường nói là lì nó không nghe các bạn.
Mute. Okay, thank you. So that's for the external elements. Once you've analyzed all that, then you move into the internal elements. The internal elements is what your company and your HR context has as an impact on the total reward strategy. So elements like the brand and the reputation, how you're doing performance management, how engaged your employees are, where and how, the culture of the organization, the way that you're structures, so the OD, all of those will have an impact on your reward strategy. So let me give you just a few examples, because I cannot go through the whole thing in less than an hour, but just to give you an example of the kind of questions you can ask yourself. So if we start with the culture on the top right, for example, your management style will have an impact on your reward strategy. Are you formal or informal? Are you more into a form of paternalism or a form of employee empowerment? Do you focus more on individuals or on teams? This will have a massive impact on how, for example, you design a recognition scheme. Will you celebrate more the team achievements or the individual achievements? How much involvement do you give to line managers when deciding, for example, the rewards for their staff? If you're in a more paternalistic approach, maybe you have rules in place and the managers don't have much of an input into that. If you're coming from a company like Microsoft or Apple, where I used to work, for example, the managers are very much empowered. There are some frameworks, but within that, they can do pretty much whatever they want. And even if they want to go outside of what we consider to be like the normal boundaries, they can do that. They just need to explain why they want to do that thing. So that's really going to have an impact. Second example I want to share is around the workforce competition. So how flexible and how your workforce is made of. Do you work, for example, in oil and gas, which is an aging industry from a demographics point of view? They know that they have lots of people who are in their mid to late, mid 50s to mid 60s, people who are going to retire. And there was so much pressure a few years ago on that industry because they were having so many people retiring that they had to create special plans to rehire the former employees who had retired and to hire them on a part-time basis, to focus more on coaching and training the new workforce, trying to replace them. And they had to create whole new ways of rewarding them, of working hours to get them back in the workforce and so on. And as I was saying earlier, depending on your company, you might have your contingent workers, your gig economy, which would have an impact on your rewards. For example, if most of your company is made of in-house employees, you don't have too much external employees, and your attitude is to say, we are going to grow our talent internally. So what you will find as a typical situation in those organizations is that they tend to have lots of people in the more junior levels, and those people tend to be massed towards the lower end of the salary range. Okay, the salary range being for each grade, you say, for example, for a grade 12, I will pay between, I'm going to give whatever numbers, between 8 and 10,000 per month. In the companies that are mostly growing their people in-house, the employees tend to be in the bottom half of that salary structure because they are always learning. And when they get promoted, they get promoted to the next level up and they tend to be at the bottom of that salary structure because they haven't had the full time yet to fully grow. But if you have people who've been there for a very long time, you might find as well that, and you're not recruiting much, you might find that you end up with a lot of employees that are in the upper end of the salary range because they have had years of salary increases and promotions and so on, and therefore your actual pay level might be higher than that of somebody else who is recruiting more new blood and not having as long tenure into the organization. Now, if we think about organization structure, you can look at different elements as well. So, for example, how much of hierarchy and segmentation do you have into your organization? That will impact the number of grades that you have. The number of grades will impact the frequency of employee promotions. And how much differentiation do you do in terms of what you give to your employees between the different categories of staff? Do you do different for your blue collars, your white collars, your management, your executives, for example? You might have an organization that is very strong on working on projects and making sure that people are flexible and working from one place to another, having multiple skills. And in that kind of organization, maybe it's relevant for you to think of creating a temporary assignment pay to make sure that people are incentivized to move to those different projects. You would be also looking at the nature of teamwork in your organization. And are you focused more on individual performance or on team performance? And that will have a direct impact on how you design your annual incentive plans, because are you going to focus on KPIs that are individual or team, or is it going to be a mix? So as you can see, all those actually, in some way, shape, or form, will have an impact on some elements of the reward package. So it's very, very important that you be very thorough when you think about that. Once you've done that analysis, I like to present it under the form of a SWOT result. So the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is kind of a summary of the impact. Because if you think of strengths and weaknesses, that's your internal analysis. And if you think of the opportunities and threats, that's the external analysis, your PESTEL, your HR trends, and so on. And you can have like kind of that summary in your head, which is going to help you to have this holistic understanding of what's going on in your workforce. And then the next step is to think about your own employees and how their preferences might impact what you offer in terms of packages. The first thing is that the reality is that in a lot of mid-sized companies and small-sized companies, we're still very much in a world of one-size-fits-all. We offer the same kind of base pay, the same bonus, the same benefits to everybody. But as soon as you start to become a little bit a more complex organization, and it's not necessarily about size, but it's about the complexity of the structure, you start to realize that depending on the country or the geography, depending on the business line, depending on the type of business that you're trying to attract and how fast they are growing. Are you in a fast-growing business, or are you in a very mature business, which means that there is less growth factor? You will see that you will have various competitors for talent, and those competitors might not even be in your direct industry. And all those kind of things will have an impact and should lead you to think that really, if we do one size fits all, it's fine, it's easy for us to manage, but is it what the business really needs? And as you can see here, the last one that I've put is the individual preferences, and that's what I'm going to dig a little bit into. It's very important for us to understand our employee needs and preferences, because it has a lot of very positive outcomes for us. It will help us to attract and retain talent, make people more motivated, having higher employee engagement. It improves the employer brand. Hopefully, by being more adapted to what employees need, we can increase the employee retention. We have more transparency, more fairness, and we are better able to support the goals and objectives of the organizations, because the organization is not distracted by tension around packages, by tension around high attrition numbers, impacting productivity, impacting income, and making wasting, more time, spending more time on recruitment of people that could have stayed. Instead of recruiting people for growth, it's recruiting people for replacement. So it's very important we look into that. But how do we look into that is going to be an exercise. We need to understand first that different types of employees might have different types of motivations. So, for example, if we think that there are four main elements in the employee package, that could be cash, that could be benefits, that could be, for example, well-being, and the other one could be, for example, growth opportunities. You might have an average employee where the package is kind of like, if we're average, it's going to be everybody the same, focuses on the same elements. But maybe if you're a blue collar, you focus more on the cash. That's where you have more interest. If you're an executive, maybe you want more cash, but also the benefits like pensions, long-term plans, and all this kind of stuff will be of more interest. If you're in sales, of course, the cash would be important, but maybe also your working environment, your growth opportunities, and so on. Maybe if you're a single parent, you need cash, but you also want to have, flexible working environment and so on. So as you can see, different types of groups can have different types of motivations. By the way, this is just theoretical exercise. You need to absolutely run that survey specific to your employees, because I swear to you, every time that I discuss that with my clients, we make assumptions together. Some of them turn out to be proven, and then we also end up always having surprises. So very, very important that you don't just rely on some kind of a theoretical average employee and so on, but you really look into what employees want and appreciate. So how do you find that out? There are lots of ways. Of course, you can do employee surveys. You can do interviews that are one-on-one. Employee focus groups are very, very effective because they're kind of a driven conversation with somebody external from the company so that the employees can be candid. But the conversation has like some guidance on the different topics. And of course, you can use your own internal data to see, for example, the real rate that people take up, for example, certain voluntary benefits in your organization and so on. And of course, let's not forget to benchmark and do a bit of market research. So when you look into employee preferences, what's going to be important at the end is that you focus on the things that are going to be very visible to the employees. So how do you think, for example, of how you're going to decide for salary increases, for promotions, for bonuses? Do you offer flexible benefits? What kind of criteria for your recognition schemes? What kind of well-being plans do you focus on? Who do you try to retain? What kind of growth opportunities are you offering to employees? Those are like the very visible things, the external things, the visible things to the employees from the employee package. But I think it's really important that you never forget to also think about how can we manage those employee preferences in the things that are behind the scenes. How do you set up your salary structures? Do you have, besides just a sales salary structure and a non-sales salary structure, a third salary structure? Let me give you a real example. When I was in Microsoft, in each country, we had only two salary structures for the population, sales and non-sales. Whole world, sales and non-sales. Numbers adapted to each country and so on, but like the structures were there. The only population that was different was in 5 countries in the world, and I was in charge of 3 of those countries for the R&D population. The R&D in Microsoft was a very, very small population, maybe a total of 300, 400 employees at the time. They were all reporting directly to Bill Gates, who was at the time not the CEO anymore. He was the chairman, but he was still very much involved in R&D. And for those populations, we were targeting a different position in the market. We had a different grading structure, we had different incentives, and we had a specific salary structure for them because we were not paying them in the same way as the others. So I'm not saying that you should have, like, if you're a hospital. So at one point, when I was in Mubadala, so the Sovereign Wealth Fund in the UAE, I was their global head of performance and reward, and one of our assets was a hospital. And the HR manager in that company comes to me and very proudly says, look, Sandrine, look, we have redone all the salary structures for the nurses. And she showed me 9 different salary structures for the nurses. There was one for the pediatric nurse, one for the oncology nurse, one for the whatever. And I was like, and those were like different by just a few small amounts. I said, why do you make it so complicated? And they were like, oh, because, you know, they can move from one to the other. And I said, yes, but if you want a nurse to move to an area which is not as valued as per your salary structure, you're not going to make them move. So I would suggest that you try to simplify that. Just keep one salary structure for the nurses. And maybe what you do is a system of additional premiums or career evolution and things like that, that would be more relevant and still allow you to differentiate between the different types of nurses. So really try to always take your step back and think about the best way to reduce your admin, but to still come up to the right way to address the needs of the employees. You will have to think about how you manage your base pay. So how do you decide the criteria for the budget for your annual salary increases, the budget for promotions, which is very often an overlooked thing. How do you make sure that you apply those criteria, who's eligible and so on, and the same for your incentives. So very important that you also think behind the scenes what you need to do. So just to give you 2 real life examples. Recently, I had a Saudi client that had a subsidiary in Spain in a completely different line of business. And in that company, they wanted to do a retirement plan. And so the CHRO and the CFO talked to me about the retirement plan, and we're going to put that in place, and it's a voluntary basis, and the employees can save money for retirement and so on. And once I started discussing with them, I found out that actually the retirement plan was a savings plan. And I said, well, but have you looked at your employee population? Most of your employees are in their late 20s to early 30s. And so we need to really make sure that if you do that, offer them other ways that they can exit that plan. And instead of saying just retirement, you could say, hey, for buying the first house, for getting married, for having a child, you could take your money back Those are some of the exit possibilities from the scheme. So they completely redefined it to still have that same overarching approach, but making sure that then they could communicate it aligned with the needs of the employees at the different stages of their life. I also had another client that had a culture very much influenced by the Japanese like employment for life type of culture. And they were very proud of that, but their employee population is very young. And I said, you know what, the younger generations, they're not excited by the idea of having an employment and, you know, retiring in 40 years in that same company. So while this is something that you can be proud of, why don't you create two types of communication? One for the employees that have been here for a long time and to make them focused on the stability and so on. And another one for the younger population where you can say, hey, since you're going to stay with us for a long time, look at the examples of those other employees that have moved from one job to another, from engineering to finance, from finance to HR, from marketing to sales, from sales to production or whatever, and show them that this longevity is an opportunity for them to experience the change that they want to have without having to necessarily look outside of the organization. So as you can see, how you adapt is not necessarily based on, let's say, how can I say, is not necessarily based on what you put in place, but sometimes about how you communicate about it so that it's attractive to different segments of your employee population. So that's also very important. So now let's dig into business questions. I want you to start thinking about what that means and how you can relate that to the business environment. So when you set a new total reward approach, you have 4 main steps. First of all, you need to look at your job grading structure, which means that you need to look at your jobs, how you're going to do the job evaluation. And the job evaluation is the process that allows you to compare jobs and to say, hey, this job in marketing is about the same kind of level as this job in production, for example, because they might be difficult to compare otherwise. So you go through a set of criteria to determine that value. And from there, you determine your job architecture, so how the jobs are organized, and your grading structure. How many grades will you have? Do you want to pay narrow, or do you have to have more variability of pay, and so on? From there, you will design your compensation structure. So ideally, you will get to the market, you will participate to a salary survey, and then from there, use that to create your salary ranges and put in place your rules to manage base pay. So how will you do salary reviews? How will you change the allowances? How will you manage your promotions? And then looking into the rest of the cash part of the package, which are your short-term incentives, so sales incentive plan, annual bonus, spot awards, and the long-term incentives if you decide to put them in place. Once you've done that, you look at all the rest of your package, the benefits, the employee well-being, recognition schemes, employee engagement, employee retention. And then once you have designed all of that, of course, you need to validate and implement. So for each of those 4 steps, I'm going to give you 1 or 2 examples of some of the business questions that can take place at the moment in this kind of VUCA world, always changing, new, you have COVID, lockdowns, then reopen, and then you have war in Ukraine and global supply chain problems, shortages of talent, all this kind of stuff. So the world being changing, what are some of the questions that are coming from the business? And I can't move, yes. So the first one is, for example, does our current job structure help us to deal with reallocation of budget and our externalized workforce? So let's imagine you're a company that has a lot of gig workers and so on. You need to make sure that your job architecture, which is this infrastructure that you use for organizing how the jobs are done. So all the codes that you use, the titles, how much harmony do you have, the type of job functions, the families, how do you organize the movements between those and so on. That's such a founding block of a lot of stuff in terms of rewards, in terms of career management, in terms of performance management, in terms of learning and development, because you might have some programs that are eligible to certain types of employees and so on, in terms of career pathing, because once you analyze the jobs and if you identify the skills that are related to them, you might create new ways of developing people in their career, and it will have also an impact of on succession management, for example. So there's a lot of stuff which you need to look into, and making sure that you don't need to change your job architecture is going to be a very important point. And you can see that every single time that you have some kind of a merger and acquisition, a reorganization, a splinter, some kind of department change, and ODs gets involved and so on. So working very closely with the reward function to make sure that the job structure is supportive of the organization. Second question. It's about pay compression and pay inequity. We are today, we have high talent competition. We have a scarcity of talent for the kind of jobs that are in demand. And those jobs can be in demand at various levels. It can be you need more waitresses and waiters for your food and business industry. It could be you need more data analysts and you're in the healthcare industry, for example, because so at the moment, those big tech companies doing layoffs is actually an opportunity for other industries that are developing a lot on their technology side. The green energy type of industry as well is very much impacted by that. So if you're working in talent acquisition, how do you handle that? Well, use your survey results to support the organization, to support talent acquisition, and making sure that you try to reduce the risk of having pay compression. Pay compression is when a new hire employee is paid more than their colleagues who've been there for a long time. And sometimes there's even what we call pay inversion, that they're paid more than their boss, okay? And it happens. We see that, and we see that in a highly competitive world. So you need to also understand what really is the market at the moment. So it's important that you look into your salary survey data. And for example, one of the things you might think of is, hey, how could we do by improving our employee referral scheme, whereby we ask our employees to help us to recruit, because those recruits are typically higher quality, faster and cheaper than having to go through a full, external search and so on. So how can we make sure that we put something in place that will incentivize our employees? If our employee engagement is high and our net promoter score in the engagement survey is high, which means that the employees are proud and would recommend the company, let's not just say, hey, are you proud and would you recommend the employee, but actually, hey, if you do recommend the company and we end up hiring those people, we will help you and we will give you something in exchange. Another question that we might want to look into is promotions. So I was mentioning it earlier. Promotions are how we say in French, the poor parent of total rewards. Nobody ever talks about employee promotions. And it's a big mistake, in my opinion. When budgets are tight and companies start to say, whoa, there's a lot of inflation, I need to increase my salary increase budget. Most of the companies, they don't really differentiate a budget for employee promotions and a budget for salary increases. And so they lose a lot of control over that spend. And there are actually lots and lots of ways that, that you can think about it. How will you set your budget? How will you make sure that you're not overspending on the promotions? Because guess what? When you tell managers that you don't have much money to distribute for salary increases, and those managers are scared of losing their best employees. And at the same time, you don't have much control about how you handle promotions, because they happen throughout the year, because they're not controlled by total rewards, because you don't have like clear criteria and so on. And they're much more dependent just on the line manager. What happens is that you see your spend on promotion go through the roof in the years that your salary increases are tight. So you really need to make sure that you have rules in place, that you put in place processes that are scalable, for example, in terms of eligibility criteria, that make sure that you will focus on the right types of employees when it comes the time to do those promotions while remaining affordable, that you have in place rules for handling employee expectations and all those exceptions that you need to have, because you don't want to have high cost, but you also don't want to create internal equity problems. Promotions really are the underdog in a lot of stuff. I mean, I was discussing that with my partner. We went through our compensation and benefits books that we have on our bookshelves. Between the two of us, we have 23 of those books. And the most we could find was like one chapter in some of the books to talk about promotional budgets, completely underviewed by many organizations. Well, it's actually an area where you can do so much in terms of helping the right employees evolve, but also managing the cost at the company level. So, next question, sales incentive plans. We hear about the economic recession coming up and it's a downturn. Should we redesign our sales incentive plans? So you will have to ask a lot of questions. How long do we anticipate the downturn to last? Do I need to change my sales incentive plan if I think that it's actually not going to be a recession in my country, maybe less growth than anticipated? And can I put in place something temporary instead of changing my whole plan? So what's the situation, the real economic situation of my company? What would be the impact on how often we pay and how much we pay? How do we make sure that we have more alignment between the forecasts, the goals, and the reality? And how do we look into the performance period? Maybe we need to extend the performance period, or maybe we need to shorten the performance period so that we can pay more often, even if the amounts are less important. So you will have to look into a lot of those if you're designing your sales incentive. By the way, never, ever, ever accept when the CEO says you redesign the sales incentive plan and says that this is an HR job. It is not an HR job. It is a business job facilitated by HR. You cannot be held accountable for setting the kind of quotas, the kind of targets, and so on. This is a joint effort with finance, with sales, with if you have product management in your marketing teams and so on, but that's not your responsibility. As a sales plan, you think of the framework, you think of the mechanics for making sure that you target a certain position in the market for your highest performers and so on, that you ensure that you have at least 70% of your employees that reach the targets and all this kind of stuff. Another question that you might have, and that has become very, very prevalent in the last few years. We have more stress coming in the organization since COVID, obviously, lots of people being close to burnout. And now that we're having high inflation and economic uncertainty, people are getting more and more stressed about their finances. The challenge is that you might say, hey, that's not my problem. People need to manage their own business and so on. But the reality is that when people are stressed, they are more distracted at work, they're less productive, and especially when it's financial stress, because it tends to take over, because it's something which is threatening the whole life of the employees. So you see that, for example, 3/4 of employees said that financial stress has had a negative impact on their productivity, of which 1/4 of that group says it's been a severe or major impact on their productivity. And I think this is a PwC survey from 2022. They found that 55% of stressed employees have lost 3 hours or more every week dealing with their finances. So for you as an organization, this is going to be something that you need to look into. So typically, this is part of well-being initiatives. You have all sorts of aspects of well-being, but one is the financial well-being. So it could be that you try to find people who will want to come and do some education on managing budgets and so on. Maybe you negotiate some better prices for the employees on a voluntary basis, if they want to benefit from certain things. There are things like advance payment. So nowadays you find apps and companies that offer to pay your employees in the month. So like if 3 weeks have passed and normally you have to wait another week to receive your salary, if an employee needs a salary advance, they would be eligible to 3/4 of their pay. If it's after 1 week, 1/4, and so on. Through those apps, people can help manage their finances a little bit better when the times are tight. So this is something that you could have a look into. Another question that you would get from the business is, how do I retain my employee? The talent is difficult to replace and so on. And so retention schemes, so you see that those golden handcuffs there, would be maybe something that you would have to consider. But also there is highly underused scheme in a lot of organizations, which is employee recognition schemes. So employee recognition schemes typically cost between 1% to 2% of the total salaries of the company, and actually have a huge impact on the engagement, the productivity, and so on. And especially if you see the graph here, peer-to-peer, P2P means peer-to-peer, that's the recognition that an employee will give to another employee. So it doesn't have to come through some form of very official award ceremony. The CEO offers you this, or the director offers you that, but also between peers, have huge impact on the revenue per full-time employees, on the customer retention, and also on employee retention. So I think it's important that you remember to look into that, because that's a low-hanging fruit in a lot of organizations that can be put in place. Finally, you might have a lot of good things put in place into your packages, but you want to make sure that you're guiding employees to make the best out of their package, deciding and being more knowledgeable. So I've put here the front page of the famous book from Thaler and Sustain. Thaler went on to have to win the Nobel Prize of Economics in 2017 for this work called Nudge. And that's the effect of behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is this new aspect of economics that looks into the psychology and the subconscious of people. And it has lots and lots of applications in the world of human resources and in the world of total rewards. There are ways that you can design your incentive plans. There are ways that you can design how people enroll into your benefits. There are ways that you can design how you communicate to make people focus about certain aspects of the plans that you're proposing and so on, that are completely supported by this new science of behavioral economics. Very few people actually apply that in the world of total rewards at the moment, but there is a massive potential. We are all familiar with the classic, motivation theories, but with this behavioral science, it gives us an arsenal of tools that help us nudge. And what is a nudge? It's a positive push by the employer in the right direction, but still giving the freedom to the employees to decide by themselves, but trying to guide them into a positive direction. Very, very important. New things to take into account, and that can really help you to have more effectiveness into how you communicate, how people perceive all those efforts that you've put into designing those total rewards. So I still have, I'll take another, we have until half past, or is it until 15 past?
Actually, we have until 3, Sandrine.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay,
what do you
so
think?
look, what I'm going to propose, people who need to leave can go. I will continue. I still have 20 minutes. So for those who want to stay, please, you're welcome to stay. I just will go very quickly on the world of the future and take questions for the people who stay. And for those people who have to go, thank you very much for being here, listening to me. And hopefully I will see you soon. And I will just continue very briefly. So in terms of future, I've mentioned technology, AI, and automation. And what we see is that, as I was saying earlier, new artificial intelligence is going to impact how people reskill and upskill, and also the amount and the type of work. If we automate and digitize everything, how much work will there be left for people? Hopefully not much, so that we have more time to enjoy life and be focused more on creative aspects and so on. But we have to really be cautious about that, because automation is great, but you need to replace it with more like fully human type of work, like the things that AI cannot do, the relationships between us and people, the emotional aspects, some of the understanding and adaptation that AI doesn't understand, because technology does not understand. It looks like it understands, but it's just an algorithm. So there's not really all that experience and that individual value that you can bring as a human that is brought through that kind of technology. So that will have an impact. The big impact that I see as well is what I call the paradox of the Hollywood model. So this is, if you think about it, in Hollywood, the actors tend to, the superstars, so let's imagine Leo DiCaprio or Brad Pitt, for example, they tend to have a team of makeup artists, hairdresser, costume designers, and directors that they like to work with, and they tend to work and come from one gig to another together. And we're seeing that more and more today in all the companies that are working with gig workers and projects. So I'm not talking the gig workers like Uber and stuff like that, more gig workers like consultants, okay? But what we see is that there is this kind of mix between those people having individual relationships and kind of forming a team. And I will give you a personal example. I work like that. I have a network of other people who specialize in comp and ben and adjacent fields, and whom I take with me whenever I work with a client to work on the bigger projects, to support the client, to complement what I can do, and so on. And sometimes we're all available at the same time. It's working well. Other times it's not working like that, but we tend to select those people. And so there will be some tension on a focus towards, do we need to have collective incentives, collective KPIs for those people, and even for our own internal teams, because who really can say that one person only is bringing success? It's more and more about teamwork and collaboration. So do we really want to continue to incentivize on those individual KPIs, or do we want to look more into collective performance? But at the same time, because I'm hiring this star and not another star to do the work, it means that what I need to give to that person needs to be personalized to what they want. You want to make sure that those people will feel that they want to come back. So even though they're external, you have to think, how do I handle them? How do I keep them? How do I keep them in my network, even though that they're not my employees, that they would want to come back on a regular basis? How do I include them in my recognition schemes? And what we see is that companies are starting to put in place what we call talent marketplaces. And in these talent marketplaces, they can be internal or external. They are places where you talk about a project and you say to anybody internal to the company, hey, can you work on that project? And people will come and work more on the project rather than on the job. So there's this kind of focus which is moving away. And those talent marketplaces can also be external. So during COVID, there was Amazon, JP Morgan, I think, and some other big companies, Walmart, maybe, I don't remember, who came together, and some of them had too many employees and they couldn't give them some work. Others were needing more people because there was more focus on, people ordering online, so they didn't go to the supermarkets during the lockdowns and so on. And so companies were loaning their staff to other companies to save jobs and to help with everybody. So those are going to come more and more. And what I want to highlight is that we tend to think of total rewards as, hey, let me manage the compression issue in this part of the employee population. Oh, we have too many employees leaving in this in this job family, let's put in place a retention scheme. Or we tend to think in very fractured elements, but we need to really think as a solution provider to the business and having that kind of bigger picture of how we can work with the talent management team to integrate how we pay for skills towards that. How do we handle managing projects in terms of performance evaluation and how that impacts the annual incentive at the end of the year and so on. So you really have to try and take that step back and become more interested in those aspects. Another thing that I want to highlight is this paradox of the Gen Z and the 100-year life. So what's happening? We're all living longer. And there's this professor in London, and I never remember if it's London Business School or London School of Economics, but her name is Linda Gratton. And she has written about this 100-year life, where basically she says, when we live up to 800 years old, the current model is that we study for 20 to 25 years, we work for 40 years, and then we retire. And the new model will be, hey, we study, yes, in the beginning, then we start working, then maybe we take a break, or we become self-employed, then we come back, we change jobs, we retire, semi-retire for a period of time, then we come back to work in a third type of industry or type of job and so on. The work will be, careers will not be like this continuous plane, but it will be a succession of shorter things. Now, at the same time, what we see is we have this new generation, which is coming up very quickly and who will, by the end of 2025 in the US, represent 27% of the work force. That's the Gen Z. And they're very much focused on having flexibility, on getting continuous feedback, on wanting to be focused on their well-being and so on. And they expect their employers to focus on diversity and inclusion, to focus on the environment, to focus on doing something for climate change. So shorter stints in the organization, yet when you look at ESG, when you look at DEI, when you look at well-being, those are not like only short-term things. Those are things that take a lot of time. And so at the same time, we have this pressure for the organization to look more into the long term, to have more long-term KPIs, but you have people who stay for a shorter period of time in the organization. How will we manage that? I honestly, I don't have an answer at that point, but I think it's something we need to be aware of because it is going to impact how we need to think about how we design our packages. And I think not just for our internal employees, but also for those who will be more entrepreneurial and will want to come in and out of the workforce, such as the gig workers. So my conclusion is there are lots of ambiguities and there is not a single right answer. There are best fit answers. So please, the one thing that is very, very important, don't just look at what your main competitor is doing and copy what they're doing, because it's not going to work for you. You have a different company, you have a different strategy, you have a different employee workforce composition. And so you cannot, if you copy what they do, it's not going to have the same impact as what they're doing for themselves. So be creative and do what's right for yourself, even if it doesn't sound like it's the newest, sexiest, trendiest thing to put in place. If it's the right thing for your company, you're going to be much more successful. So that's my conclusion for you today. And now the 1 minute, let's say, a sales pitch. We are announcing, so HRD Future invited me to create 5 brand new trainings that we're going to launch this year. And as you can see, the topics here are very much related to some of those very important questions that you need to ask yourself in terms of adapting your reward strategy for today's environment and tomorrow's environment. The sessions are 1 full day over two consecutive days. They will take place online at 10 o'clock Dubai time, 2 p.m. Singapore time. And we will do 2 sessions, and you can find out more by following the link here. So that was my really short 1 minute sales point, but really, if you look at those topics, those are topics that I've mentioned to you, you know, the employee promotions, making sure that you have the right referral, recognition, and retention schemes. How do you handle employee segmentations? How do you handle pay compression if you're hiring people at a higher salary than your existing employees? And also getting you started in thinking about this behavioral science of total reward, to make sure that you have that latest thinking in your head and new tools to help you to communicate better and design better schemes. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I think we can enter the question and answer.
Okay, Sandrine, I think I will enter all the questions in
Okay.
chat, but you can select from there which ones. I've also
Okay.
indicated how many people reacted to each question, so
Okay,
you can
so
go
let
ahead.
me stop the share so that I can see the chat.
Okay, entering here.
Okay. All right. Okay,
Put
so
put the ones on top as the most reacted to.
okay, thank you. So will we have access to the slides? Yes, I'm fine with you to get the slides. Okay, the reward mix, work-life balance appear in both social needs and self-actualization. Yes, because in work-life balance, you can interact with other people when you have enough time to have a social life, but also you can use your time to do your hobbies, to learn some new skills and so on. So work-life balance is like for everything in life, not just one thing. And so it can have an impact on two of your different types of needs. How do we determine budgets for promotions? Is there a best practice? Yes, there are many ways that you can think about for your budgets for promotions. Basically, things around, how can I say? Things around looking how many promotions you had last year, things that were promoted compared to the number of employees that you have. I have actually in the course that I will go, there's a whole section on that, so I cannot answer in 5 minutes, but there are ways that you can be more intentional about how you set a budget for promotion separate from your general salary increase promotion. Okay, how do we design an effective reward strategy under cost constraint environment? That's a good question. So you address that. You go through this element of the PESTEL, the internal analysis and so on. And in terms of cost constraint, you try to figure out where you can be more effective. So it's not going to be necessarily about cutting costs, but it's going to be more effective. And it can be that you focus on some elements where you can be better at your communication, sometimes by changing providers and making some savings, sometimes by redesigning and managing how many exceptions you allow, because sometimes a lot of the cost is coming from managing the exceptions. So the governance of your plans and so on. There are multiple ways that you can do that. What's the next one? How do we design an effective reward strategy under cost containment? How do we factor inflation into salary increase review when market data does not seem to factor in inflation rates? Yes, excellent question. So the challenge with most salary surveys and the results is that a lot of time they run a few months before for the previous year. And of course, your situation is going to change all the time. You can look into more updated Chamber of Commerce type of inflation levels. But I would say that one of the things that we tend to forget is not just to look at the inflation itself, but to look at how the salaries have actually evolved in the last period and how we think that they're going to evolve. Because you might have inflation of 10%, but if companies all decide that they're going to give budgets of 6% for salary increases, the salaries will increase only by 6%. And so you really have to look into that as well. And there are sometimes in some countries where you get inflation numbers that do not reflect the reality. So I have clients in Turkey, for example, and in Turkey, the official inflation rate by the government might be 100%. But actually, when you look at the Chamber of Commerce and any kind of business environment, they all tell you it's more like 160%, for example. So you need to find those sources to put those numbers together that are credible to your management to look into that. And there are a lot of the salary survey providers that will do and continue to do spot surveys on inflation to try and help you guide your thinking on the inflation, but also on the salary budgets, because those are two different things. They influence one another, but they don't necessarily are exactly the same. Oh, AI help in total reward strategy. I'm not sure that AI can help you in your total reward strategy as such. However, if you use some AI-enabled tools, especially in terms of data analysis, maybe it will help you to identify, for example, if you do an employee engagement survey, different groupings of employees. And so, as I was saying earlier, when you're looking into employee preferences, maybe you will find that certain groups of employees that you hadn't identified are actually reacting very strongly to certain elements of the package. And so the AI may help you to surface that, but at this point in time, it's mostly like if you look at generative AI. So for example, one of the things that I've looked for one of my clients is creating guidance for managers on how to give better feedback to employees in the employee year-end appraisal, for example, or throughout the year. So how to put that in a better way in terms of communication, how to educate them and so on. So that can be something that helps you as well. The Towers-Watson model, is it the same with being known as Willis-Towers-Watson today? So this Towers-Watson model was from before Willis-Towers-Watson, Willis and Towers-Watson merged. So I don't know which model they have today. My point by showing you a different model is to say, you can group all the different elements of the employee value proposition however you want. I created that one based on the Maslow pyramid hierarchy of needs because I wanted to show that it doesn't matter how you group them as long as you make sure that you consider all elements and you have a holistic approach. So choose your model that you like and then put all the different elements of your package into those groupings so that you make sure that you don't forget something when you're doing your review and when you're trying to establish your strategy. That's the most important. It doesn't really matter how you group the elements. It just matters that you're systematic and you try to think of having this kind of holistic approach. Alors, let me scroll down. Can you give samples of P2P recognition and does it have a price attached to it? So peer-to-peer recognition, in a lot of companies, you sometimes have companies that put an app where you have points that you can distribute to your other employees, or you have like stars that you can send out to somebody else. Other companies put in place badges. They create the badge in each department to say, hey, we will have this kind of awards. And then it's like on a Facebook wall, basically, you're happy somebody helped you and you give them a badge to say publicly to everybody, hey, this person helped me. Thank you so much. You've been so helpful. So, for example, you're working on redesigning the standard employment contracts in your company, and you're working with somebody in legal, that person is helpful, you give them an award for best teamwork or something like that. Some of those come with points, and those points can be transformed into accessing, a catalog of experiences or prizes that the person can get. So there's sometimes like an element of an award attached to it, but they're mostly about recognizing one another and making sure that in a world where nobody really fully works in a silo, that you make sure that that collaboration is recognized and rewarded. Okay. The temporary, how can we start to design personalized benefits? So personalized benefits, I would say the easiest step is once you have identified your clusters of employees, that you start by communicating in targeted ways towards the different clusters of employees. And then you can add what we call voluntary benefits, which are things that basically, for example, the company negotiates on behalf of the employees. So for example, they go to a childcare location and they say, hey, our employees are very close to you. Would you give a discount to our employees to come and use your childcare services, and then you offer that to employees with the discount? It doesn't cost you anything as an employer. It's a voluntary benefit. Only the people who are interested take it, but they benefit from a saving that you have negotiated because you have a bigger, let's say, purchasing power than if they come alone to that location. So that's the second low hanging fruit. And then the next level is to look into how can you, for example, in your health insurance, give some choice to employees. For example, I don't know, between physiotherapy and additional dental protection, or additional vision protection, or between different elements of that package. Once you get into the insured benefits, my recommendation is that you start working with your broker to see what they can do, what exists, and what you can put in place, because it's going to be very different from one country to another, and one provider to another. So it's best to work with your provider, with your broker for that kind of stuff. How do we ensure we're able to achieve internal pay equity in such competitive market when most candidates would expect at least 30% for their job? So that's exactly what I was saying. The challenge is, how do you ensure that? So first of all, how many people are you really recruiting? If you're recruiting like an additional 10, 20% of your workforce, then you're going to really have a more generalized potential pay compression issue and internal equity issue. But if you're only recruiting a few people, you're more looking at individual cases. So you don't handle those the same way as you handle a general pay compression issue. If you start to see pay compression issue where the new hires are paid a lot more than the existing employees, that would justify that you make that analysis before the salary budgets are set up, and you create a special budget called an adjustment budget, which allows you to do some kind of a collective increase for the people who are now lagging behind the price of the market and lagging behind their new colleagues. If it's more of one or two people who are hired here and there, not creating like an overall organizational pressure, then you would handle that more at an individual level, that if you see that one or two high-performing employees who have been there for a long period of time are being paid less than the new person, you make them a priority in the salary increase, but you don't need to necessarily create a special budget for managing those few cases. So it really depends on the impact. And let's be honest, I know that employees have expectations, and candidates have expectations, but the reality is that in managing those expectations, do you know if the competition is actually giving them 30%? Because as a candidate, I can say I want 30%, but if all the employers tell me no, it's going to be maximum 20, either I stay where I am or I take the 20. I mean, there's not going to be. So you also need to try and get a little bit of a sense for what's going on in other companies and trying to figure out what's really going on with them. Okay. So what time is it? I unfortunately have to go. Darcy, is there a way that we can save the questions in the chat? And maybe I can give an answer separately in writing, or I'll do a quick video that we can send the link so that I answer, because there's still quite a lot of questions. So
Yes.
we have passed.
Yeah, part of the recording is recording of the chat, so we will send you a more compressed
Okay,
version.
very good. And does anybody have a question? I will take one question from somebody in the audience. So if somebody can.
I think Maya had a question. How can we fix pay compression issues in its approach?
Hello?
I think Maya Al-Ghazi asked the question.
Okay, so please ask me your question.
Darcy, you're mute.
Yeah, you have to unmute. You have to unmute if you want to ask a question.
Okay, it doesn't seem like anybody wants to talk and ask the question. So, okay, we're at the end for today. I will get to answer the final questions from the chat. Thank you, everybody, for standing and staying until the end. I know I went over the allocated time. I hope you found it useful, and hopefully I'll see some of you during those master classes. Don't hesitate to go back and ask questions about that. I look forward to those sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Sandrine. And we will all be sending you emails for the links for Sandrine's 5 masterclass courses again. Thank you so much again on behalf of HRD Future for recordings. Please ask for it at the email that we posted. It will be available only for 7 days. And for other concerns, please do reach out. Thank you so much, and I hope you had a very insightful. The email is operation@hrd-future.com. Let me drop that now. Okay, we have your email, so we'll also send you that's at not number. We will send you more detailed information via email. Thank you so much everybody for attending. We hope you have a very good day. Thanks,
Thank you.
Sandrine.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, everyone.